Okay, it's 6:35, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this thing off. I'm so excited for everyone who's joining us. My name is Carrie Larkin. I'm one of the alumni engagement officers at Linfield, and Pubs and Profs kind of been my thing, and I'm very excited for our first ever virtual Pubs and Profs. We have the amazing Natalie Welch here with us. I love, people have already started using the group chat, so keep doing that. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, head to the group chat and we will address them there. This is going to be a very interactive kind of chat with Natalie tonight, so she would love for you to use that feature. And I'm going to hand it over to Natalie, and she's going to do amazing. So enjoy, everyone.
All right, I'm just typing up a little chat to get us started here. I want you guys to let me know in the chat where you're joining us from and what your favorite sport is. All right, put that out there. So I'm going to start my presentation here, and I'll look forward to seeing where everybody's joining us from. I'm guessing got Montana, Washington, McMinnville. Love it, love it. I am so excited to have this time with you guys. When Kaylee asked me to do this and kind of come up with a talk, I was like, oh, I can talk about like the impacts of COVID and sports, and then of course Indian country, because I grew up on the reservation, and then I realized, wow, that's a lot more than just like 1 hour. So I definitely have plenty to share with you guys. Give me 1 second while I go to my full screen mode here. All right. Hopefully everybody's seeing that okay? Actually, let me try this. Sorry, bear with me. Oop, get this going. All right, let's present. And I'm going to standard. You know, got to work out all the kinks here virtually. I do encourage you to, if you have a beverage, definitely enjoy that, since we are keeping the pubs and profs going here. So that's my little cheers to everyone. Hopefully you're wrapping up a long week and we can start the weekend a little bit early and get that going. So who am I? And you might hear the dogs now because they're going crazy in the background. But my name is, so as Kaylee said and gave me a great intro, my name is Natalie Welch. I grew up on the Cherokee Indian Reservation in Western North Carolina. And I used to say that I was from the mountains, but people in Oregon told me that those aren't mountains, those are hills. And so I learned very quickly that I'm from the hills of North Carolina. And growing up there was really awesome and unique. And my family was super tight. Our whole community really was. And we said when we played for, we didn't just play for our school, we played for our entire tribe. And it was always just really instilled in me to be proud of where I came from and be proud of my tribe and my people. And all my family, you know, is from the reservation and grew up there. And it's just a really tight-knit area, a lot of cool cultural traditions and bonds that we have there. And I always wanted to go to college. That was just what I knew I wanted to do. And I fell in love with the University of Tennessee over in Knoxville. And it was just about 2 hours from the reservation. So it was, you know, it was far enough, but it wasn't too far to where I couldn't go home if I needed to, or needed mom to do some laundry. So I definitely took advantage of that. And I really just fell in love with sports at UT. I mean, I loved sports growing up, but it just took it to another level. Being in a stadium with 100,000 fans, all in orange, yelling at the top of their lungs, and you know, beating Florida, that's always one of the best feelings in the world. So we had a really, I really had a really great time, and I knew I wanted to work in sports in some capacity. And I was able to learn about a program at the University of Central Florida, and it was about diversity and inclusion and sports leadership. And the bottom pictures on the slide are actually from our trips to New Orleans when we would go and rebuild houses, and we would go twice a year as a group. And maybe if any of my grad school friends are on, they may see themselves in the photo there. And it was just kind of a life-changing experience for me, where I saw we all see kind of the glitz and glamour of sport, but we don't see the kind of the community side a lot, where we can really connect and give back. And so that really brought that full circle for me. And I saw the power that sport had to change people's lives through that program. And I just really fell in love with community engagement and outreach. And it's propelled me on this really great career path. And my dream job was Nike, and I eventually made it there. I first had a stop off at the ESPN Wide Sports down in Orlando. So if anybody has been in a big youth sports, you think of the any kind of little league, World Series, all these kind of big youth events, a lot of them are often held down at Wide Sports. So like the AAU basketball, Atlanta Braves spring training was also held there. And this facility has like 30 sports fields. And so you can see why it's being talked about to be used for NBA during this time of kind of COVID-19 craziness, because it is kind of its own Disney World of sports. And after I got the call to join N7 at Nike, and it was really just a dream come true. I got to be an intern, but also do a really lot of things, because N7 is such a small initiative within Nike. We kind of had to do it all. We had to go to meetings with designers, go to meetings with marketing team, go to meetings with the legal team. And it really opened my eyes to how big Nike is and how much they're involved in. And it opened me up to the world of agencies too. So after a really great time at N7, I hopped over to the agency side and worked at Widen+Kennedy for almost 5 years actually, and really got into when branded content was starting to become a really big thing, and things like P&G's Thank You Mom campaign. And we did a lot of really cool vignettes around Olympians and their moms. And I mean, who doesn't love Olympians and their moms? That was just, it was kind of a dream job. And I just had been so lucky to be a part of the campaigns I was a part of. And I kind of found myself spinning my wheels a little bit and wondering, I didn't see myself really in advertising for the long term, and I had gotten away from the native stuff, and I wanted to somehow get back to that. And so my old advisor at Tennessee welcomed me back to the PhD program, and I got my PhD in sport management last year. I finished and had the opportunity to come to Linfield, and I keep saying dream job because this has really been my dream job. I've been able to work with such great faculty like Denise, who I know is on tonight, and the athletic department. And it has really brought kind of my world full circle, and my passion for sports and young people, and also being able to tie in the Native initiatives, which I'll talk more about. And I am just so excited to connect with you guys, because I am really pumped to connect more with alumni. I've been overwhelmed with alumni I've met so far, and how involved alumni are in our community. So I'm really excited to talk to more of you guys. So next we got here, so what I love about sports, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about this, and how the first photo is actually me at a Blazers game, but that is not a Portland Trail Blazer. That is Blake Griffin for when he was at the Clippers, and was probably one of my biggest athlete crushes. And you can see my excitement there, and just the excitement and the connection you can have with athletes and fans, I think is super exciting. The community that you can build, I'm sure everyone probably has had that experience, either being a rec league team or high school team or college team, and just the atmosphere that comes with that community. And then the story, I had to shout out Linfield and the street, and just how no matter where you go with sport, you can usually find the story. And it is really, really something that has been the other consistent in my life is stories. And I find it to be super powerful and can really cause people to act and change. So now, our lives, if we think back to March 11th, and how crazy a day March 11th was. This is a little breakdown of that day and how I like to call this the day that sports stopped. And we had just kind of entered the craziness with COVID-19. We had the cases in Seattle and they were starting to spread. And then there was talk of taking fans away from sporting events and not having fans at the March Madness, and people were kind of going crazy about that. But then this was the day it all changed, and a NBA player had COVID-19, and this was also the day that Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson came out and said they had COVID-19. And so that really was, I feel like, kind of a tipping point for a lot, and especially in the sports industry. And this was the day that everything kind of stood still for this most of the sports world. And I think it's crazy to think about. We left Linfield that next week, I believe, was when we started our early spring break. And I came back to Knoxville thinking we thought we'd be back at school by April. And it's crazy to think about now that we thought we would be back in April. And now we're just hoping we can come back in the fall. And it is just crazy how in just 2 short months, this has really kind of taken off. And we've seen a lot of adaptions. And pro sports side, you'll see the photo is from the Bundesligas and how they've put up posters of fans to make it seem like there's fans in the stands. And I was having a good discussion with a friend about how, how much would you pay to have your photo in the stands? How much would you pay to have a sound and you could be yelling in the stands? And it's just too bad we don't have avatars yet. And there was so much going on at this time in March. Like, we still didn't have really good testing in the general public. And so there was a lot of questions around, well, why are professional players able to get tested so easily? Why are NBA players getting tested like at the drop of a hat? And so it was pretty controversial, and kind of showing again those disparities between the haves and the have-nots. And then media had already been locked out of locker rooms, and so there's a lot of questions around, well, will media return in the same way that it did before? A lot of media jobs have been cut. I've had a lot of friends that have lost jobs that work in sports media, and it's really heartbreaking. And it's that's their livelihood, and it's had this huge effect on not only kind of you talk about grocery stores and nurses, but this is a entire industry that's been kind of turned on its head. And people that work concessions and security and that depend on these events to make rent and put food on the table. And it's been really impactful to see. You'll see players make donations to those employees that have lost work, and you wonder, okay, where are the owners in all this? And it really opens the eyes to see like the kind of disparities between ownerships and players. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And also on the international level, of course, we've seen different countries do different things with Bundesligas. As I said, they started back playing last week, and they've been much better about testing and containing the virus, but they're also breaking some quarantine rules and causing a lot of people to ask questions about how they're running those things. So it's a really, every situation is kind of different. And with these pro teams, it's the ultimate kind of risk reward situation where they're having to balance between making money off of games and maybe not having fans in the stands and relying on broadcast, and then not playing at all, and protecting the safety of all the invested bodies. So it is a really and every day there's a new headline about something evolving. And on the college side, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about how that day to day is being updated as well. So let's move on ahead here. So with the professional side too, thinking about the TV experience and the NFL draft. If anyone watched from home, I'd love to see your comments and what you thought about that. But we got an inside look at a lot of owners and how they their lifestyles, the Cliff Kingsburys of the world, and their kind of little mansions and their pretty sweet setups. And then just this past weekend, we had a PGA skins where players were playing, carrying their own bags, driving their own carts, caddies playing in shorts. And then on the NASCAR side, having events without fans. And these are obviously events that are not as impacted by having fans in the stands, which is really interesting. And they've seen all of these events have had really record-breaking ratings. But I did hear a really great point of that, they're talking about 5 million watching the NASCAR race or 15 million watching the NFL draft. But I mean, right now there should be like 300 million people home. So when you're thinking about all the people that are home and all the people that are watching, it's kind of it makes you wonder if it's really is what, as good as you would want on the sports side, or if it's just these diehard fans that are so hungry for sports. And so now I'd like to do a little poll and see how you guys are feeling about this return to sports. So I'm going to launch the poll, and I want you to think about, when do you see yourself attending a sporting event again? And it could be at any level, professional, college, youth. Do you think it'll happen this summer, this fall, in more than a year? I'm really interested to see what you guys think. All right. Votes are piling in. Give a few more seconds here. Wow, okay. So we got 27, 29. Give it a few more seconds. And if you've already attended an event, I guess you could say this summer, but I doubt anyone has done that. All right. Give a few more seconds here. And again, if you're joining us late, and I'd love to hear where you're joining us from in the chat and your favorite sports. All right, so here's what we got. We got most people saying that they think they'll be attending an event next year. Really, really interesting, because I've definitely got my fingers crossed that Linfield will be back in the fall and I'll be able to attend some Linfield sporting events. But yeah, I think this is probably a good representation of what's happening across the country. It's really touch and go. And if you have young athletes, and I know I've been back in Tennessee now since spring break, and they're pushing really hard to get youth sports back out there. And it's a weird and kind of scary time. So oh, sorry, I meant to share results. There we go. So you are now viewing the poll results. All right, so I'm gonna move right along here, and feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. I have got a lot to cover, but I think we can make it happen. And hopefully you're enjoying a nice beverage or some dinner. But I found this to be an interesting poll from Arizona State's Global Sport Institute. They talked about the necessary precautions to be put in place, and talking about hand sanitizer, temperature screenings, something that's been happening, I think, at a lot of airports, signage, and then no precautions needed. So I thought that was interesting to see that, what precautions we might have to think about and might have to plan for as sport administrators. I'll have to ask Gary Kilgore how much he's expensing for hand sanitizer in the coming future. So on the college level, now this is where I think it gets really interesting, because of course we call them student athletes, right? And students should come first. And we had California last week say they're not coming back to school in the fall. So a lot of people said that's a bad sign for sports. But then you have a lot of schools in the South, and Arizona was, one of the states pushing to reopen. And there's a lot of really questionable people in high high areas of power talking about how they're going to make this work. I have a college president at West Virginia saying he thinks that they need to return. They should be fine, and we shouldn't panic. And it is really can get really questionable. And then you think about coaches, and I definitely wouldn't be surprised if a SEC coach said something similar to what Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State says, with he wanted to bring players back and, need to run money through the state of Oklahoma. So a little tone deaf, and he has since apologized, but very questionable thinking coming along with some of these programs. And so just yesterday, you may have heard that they did allow that players are going to allow to kind of return to campuses in June for activities and practice kind of events for basketball and football, women's and men's. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing. And when I was talking to Gary about how this all works and how, the NCAA is really trying not to set a precedent for everyone, because this is a very regional problem. Things even just in Oregon versus California and Washington are very different. And even by county, we're seeing this now, and it's going to come down to conferences, and it's going to come down to individual schools before we see what's going to happen at the college level, and if teams are willing to travel. And it's going to be really, really interesting next couple of months on this front. And I hope that a lot of these schools can get through it without having to result to cutting sports. And this is something that's really been heartbreaking to see. A colleague in sport management is keeping a running list of sports that have been cut, and something to think about, and I think that most people don't think about, is when you think about the non-revenue sports and how many players on those sports aren't scholarship athletes, they're paying for their tuition, and especially at a school like Linfield, where we are not a scholarship school, they count as just as much as any student. And so that's where I think there's been a lot of questionable decisions made. And so here's the list of all the sports that have been cut. Central Michigan, and sports like track and field, where I saw a student say, yeah, it really cost a lot to, cut from, my coaching spikes or my running spikes. And he didn't feel it was a very expensive sport. Even schools like Furman, which here in the South is a pretty big school and really big program. And the MAC conference eliminated conference tournaments for field hockey, men and women's soccer, tennis, lacrosse, softball, and baseball. And it is just kind of mind-blowing when you think about this effect and how these decisions are being made. And it really, really makes me wonder if these are going to be really regretted decisions. And but one school, I know, Akron, they said they're having to cut a ton of academic programs, and that along with that, they would have to see cuts on the athletic side as well. So it's just really a bummer to see, and hopefully a lot of schools can prevent this, and we can really figure out better solutions. And if it's donors stepping up, things like that. So at Linfield, I wanted to talk about, of course, being my first year, I've been blown away by the athletes at Linfield and the leadership that they show. And my heart absolutely breaks for all the seniors and the spring athletes who lost their senior season. And many of them don't have, NCAA was granting permission for student athletes to return for another year if they wanted to. But a lot of these athletes at Linfield, they have jobs lined up, or they have other things they have to move on in life. And even if you come back for another year, you're not going to be in that same situation that you were this year. And especially my lacrosse girls, I just feel heartbreak because they've just been through a crazy 4 years. And one of the athletes said to me, I was talking to her and she's like, this isn't just my season that was lost. It was my parents too. They were looking forward to watching me this year, and it just absolutely breaks my heart. And I feel so deeply for them. And I think that it's just such a bummer. And I don't know what else we can do. And I just look forward. I told them, I was like, we're going to have these alumni games, and we're going to have to get you guys back on campus when we can. And, have those kind of events where they can still kind of keep up with their sport. But I am really, really proud of Linfield and our student athletes. And I hope that we can return in the fall. And I think that we'll come back kind of stronger than ever if we're able to do that. So switching gears, I did want to brag on my students as well, if anyone of them are joining me. In my sport marketing class, when we switched to online learning, I challenged them to create an infographic like the ones on the screen for class, and tell me about how coronavirus has been impacting sports. And I thought they did a really great job. You can see two of the examples here, talking about the advertising effects, the college athletics, and just all the numbers involved. And so some really fun stuff from them. And just, I think we're never gonna, hopefully never have another time like this where they're going to be, switching to online learning during this huge disruption. So I was like trying to tie it in as much as I could to class, and they really picked it up and ran with it. And it's been really cool to see how they've kind of adjusted as we've moved to online learning. And I'm all about visuals, and so I was really cool to see them put in all this great work. Travis asks, will there be a difference between Division I and lower levels when it comes to ease of return to play? I think that's a really, really great question. And I think just like with, like I said, with Division III, there's not scholarships involved. So I think that helps a ton with the kind of expense side. And it's really interesting too, because Division I, especially the Power Five, they're just lighting money on fire. I feel like when, like, a lot of the SEC schools, they pay thousands of dollars to go spend the night before a game in, the next, it'll be, even if it's a home game. So for Tennessee, for example, they will go and they will get the student team in a hotel in Knoxville the night before a game. That is a very unnecessary expense. While it may be great and it may be good to get the team focused, it's a huge thing. And there's all these expenses that I think too, like, don't really translate in a budget. There's such a wonky way of how budgets are worked in the on the university side, or on the athletics side and so I think it will be interesting. I think it'll be harder, honestly, for Division I because of the greater amount of travel and the bigger conferences and things like that. But I think it's really going to be a lot of touch and go. I think a lot of teams might start considering playing more locally. I think that'll be a big saver, not only in travel expenses, but also in the spreading of this virus, right? And high school too. High school, I think, will be, again, more localized. And I think that would make things hopefully easier. And, but again, it's going to, I think, create more disparities between the haves and the have-nots, because maybe the private schools that have money for testing are going to be able to return a lot quicker than public schools who don't have that. And I love Kathleen bringing up the coaches' salaries, because that's a thing. I wonder about some of these schools that are cutting sports. Why don't you just, some of these salaries, if you look at a map, I just showed this map in class, nearly every state in the United States, the highest paid public employee is a football coach or a basketball coach. They're getting paid enormous amounts. And if, some of these coaches were willing to say, hey, cut my salary to save a program, I think that would go a long way. And I think that's going to be another really interesting dynamic of this, because I think this is going to be a time that we're starting to really question these things. Like, these salaries, Nick Saban and Dabo Sweeney at Clemson, like they just keep growing and growing. And it's more, they're making more money. The money they make is enough to fund the entire Northwest Conference. You know, it's really getting kind of out of control. So it's all good that I love in sport. There is definitely some issues we can work out. I think it's no time like now to do that. So, and thinking on the youth sport side, I was a little terrified to see this headline from May 9th, and that baseball tournaments returning. And I also have a special connection to this because my partner Spencer, he is a baseball, softball trainer and coach. And right now he's kind of in the balance of waiting to see if they're gonna want to return to playing tournaments here in Tennessee. And it's really nerve-wracking. And he's been really cautious about working with kids. And you know, it's not, I think, as we all know, it's not about the kids as much as it is them spreading it to their families and to other people. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to follow and see how, you know, we talk about some of these sports parents who are just out of control. And I mean, Spencer, my partner, he was like, there's nobody out recruiting right now. So we're not, you know, they shouldn't be worried about missing out on those opportunities. And, you know, and I'm sure all the colleges are just worried about getting their own sports back. So it's really interesting, and I think going to show again that divide between these leagues that are just complete money grubbing and like where, you know, the access to the more lower level grassroots. I hope that this will maybe cause people to really question those and think about maybe we should be doing this a little bit differently. I want to keep it rolling here because I definitely want to talk about this effect also in Indian country. So let's take a little, oh, here's another. So this was, I thought, another interesting poll, and it's something else to consider. Do you think the inability to play sports has caused stress on your child? And an overwhelming majority said yes. And if, you know, kids aren't lucky enough to have a backyard or have a safe place to play, that's really going to have a huge impact on their not only physical health but their mental health. And so this is another really important consideration. So one of the cool things I've seen throughout this is athletes that have, as I mentioned, stepped up to help employees that have lost jobs. You have Manny Pacquiao saying he's not thinking about fighting. All he's thinking about is helping out his home of the Philippines. And many of you may not know this, but Kyrie Irving is his mother was a member of the Standing Rock. He was adopted, or she was adopted, and didn't really know her heritage. But once he found out that she was a part of the Standing Rock Sioux, he started giving back. And he's done a lot of this without a lot of fanfare and without a lot of media and PR. And he's been giving back during this crisis back to the Pine Ridge, which is one of the more really underfunded, just resource-wise, are not one of the more fortunate tribes in the country. And so that segues me to the sports and Indian country. And so people ask me all the time, like, is Indian a proper term? And it's funny because you can ask almost anyone I talk to that's Native. It's like, we don't call ourselves Indians, but we do call the collective Indian country. It's just a term that works really well for referring to Indian country and the Native communities across the United States. And I think the preferable thing is to refer to people's individual nation. So for me, I would say I'm Cherokee. I wouldn't say I'm Native or Indian. I would say I'm Cherokee. So, but we do really find power as a collective across the country in this kind of term of Indian country. And maybe you've heard about how hard the Navajo Nation's been hit, and they just surpassed New York and New Jersey as the highest per capita of cases. And a lot of the Navajo Nation and the land that they occupy across the 4 states in the Southwest is really barren, is really not really modern at all. The access to water, clean running water, it's just causes so many issues when you talk about a virus like this, where the cleanliness is so important. And I was lucky enough to be on a panel last week with one of the doctors who's actually real doctor working in Navajo Nation, and how, it's just wreaked havoc. And but it's been cool to see kind of how, the headlines may be about how bad it has been, but there's also been a lot of good that's come out of this. We've had places like my tribe. We've been really lucky. We were able to close our borders really early on, and we're in the western part of North Carolina, right in the Great Smoky Mountains, and we have a lot of tourist traffic. We have a big casino, and so shutting down our borders was a huge deal. And it was really wild. I went home, and it was wild to see that there was just no traffic, but there was tons of families out on their bikes, and there was tons of people out going on hikes. And so people, even though we were kind of closed down, we were able to be more active outside, which was really cool to see. And it was just a good example of us being able to exercise our sovereignty as a tribal nation, instead of having to wait on the state regulations. We were able to do our own thing, and we shut down before the state was able to do so. So that's one of the other benefits that's come of this. There's been tribes in South Dakota that have been battling with their governor over these shutdown measures, and it's been really cool to see how our tribes and our Native people have been able to kind of take control over that. And as I mentioned, we have a casino, so that's really been impactful on that industry for us. But I think it's in some ways a good thing, because it's causing our tribes to think about other alternative sources of income. Like for us, we are just in such a great area of the mountains that we could really do a lot around recreation. And we just opened a new mountain biking trail before all this happened. And there's other ways to get there's a lot of tribes out west that are doing sustainability and solar power and wind power and things like that. So hopefully that we can lean into those kind of sustainable practices, and these effects of casinos and those kind of things can be minimal. And we've also seen some really cool things happen on social media. We've seen the Social Distance Powwow pop up, which is a Facebook group with over 130,000 people on it now. Had some appearances. I highly recommend Smoke Signals. If nobody's seen that movie, it's a really great classic. If anyone's on TikTok, you may have seen the brush challenge, where people are putting the brush up to their camera and then turning it back, and they turn up all beautified. And so we saw a lot of Native girls doing that with their traditional dress. And it's been one of the really cool outcomes of this, as well as here's the kind of the athletic version, the sports version. I think we did at Linfield, we did that kind of a passing of the ball, or we did the basketball, I know, for the women's basketball team, and the lacrosse ball with the lacrosse team. And so this was the Native version, where they would pass the ball and show kind of their athletic side as well as their kind of traditional Native side. So it was really, really cool to see, and just a huge kind of viral, for lack of a better term, hit on social media. And then you have people like Jordan, who May 5th, many of you may have been at home celebrating Cinco de Mayo, but Jordan actually, she is kind of famous in Indian country for starting this movement around missing and murdered Indigenous women. If you don't know, Native women are missing, murdered at just alarmingly high rates, and it's not even really tracked very well, just because the missing and the murdered piece of it, and it's really tragic. And I think almost everyone in Indian country has been affected by this, and we're very matriarchal communities, and so our women are very important. And she kind of was one of the first to start the trend with the hand over her, the painted hand over her mouth, and running for murdered and missing Indigenous women. She ran the Boston Marathon. I think that was last year, or the year before. And so this year, May 5th rolls around, and it's the Awareness Day for the murdered and missing Indigenous women, in addition to being Cinco de Mayo. And I really applauded her, because I could see she could have easily just been like, man, we're dealing with COVID and this virus, and there's there's not, I can make a post on Instagram, but there's not really much else I can do. No, she ran 2 miles on a treadmill every hour for 26 miles and dedicated each of those to one of the murdered missing Indigenous women. And she was also on the call I was on last week, and she is just such a inspiration. She is a ambassador for Lululemon, and so she got a huge billboard. I think that was in California, and she lives in Los Angeles area. And she has just been such a cool phenomenon to watch in Indian country and get the word out, and really taking advantage of this time when people are kind of on social media constantly and not letting them forget about these issues when it would be really easy to forget during a time like this. So that brings me to shameless plug. I have a podcast called Creative Native where I talk to Native athletes about their stories and their journeys. And this lovely lady on the left here, Elise, is one of my best friends and mentors. And she came on an episode with me. We were actually supposed to attend the NCAA Inclusion and Forum in April, and obviously with COVID that got canceled. And so we decided to kind of vent to each other on a podcast episode and talk about these issues and the things that were going on in Indian country. And not long after that episode, Dr. Kelsey Leonard had messaged me on Twitter saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing this article about, the effects of COVID on Indian country and sports. Would you be interested?" And I was like, me and Elise just talked about this. So we ended up teaming up to write an article, and submitted it late on Monday night, and really proud of that work. And from that, we created Kelsey created this really great visual, and I just had to share it with you guys because it kind of shows you the different ways that we quote unquote exercise sovereignty and exercise this independence that we have. And so these are the 5 factors of that, and the way that sports ties into those, and just, our community and how sport is such a big part of that. You may have I agree, Sarah. And how Resball is a way of life. If you've heard Resball, you'll know that it's just such a powerful thing from Alaska all the way down to Florida. It's a really cool style, and it's something that is just kind of a constant across Indian country. And just the community, the kinship, and all these different factors really bring together a really powerful movement of sport. And you have people like Jordan who really exemplify these different factors. And just the way that, we've seen virus and we've seen genocide before, and we're still here, and we're still going to do sports, and we're still going to be active and use sports to empower ourselves and really express our cultural identities. And so I can't be more proud of this graphic and the team that we put this together. So hopefully we'll be able to share that with you guys soon. So checking my time here. So some bigger things to think about as well on the sports side, kind of overall. If any of you saw the protest in Florida for some gyms to reopen, I thought that was pretty hilarious. But there is a psychological impact on society as a whole for, someone called it like the Pavlov's dog kind of response, that if sports comes back, everything's okay. If sports are happening, we're going to be okay. Kind of like if you're old enough to remember 9/11, when sports was able to resume. It's such a big part of American culture. And so it's going to have some really interesting psychological ramifications. And on the sociological side, is this going to hinder the progress that we've been seeing made on women's sports? That's, I think, a really interesting thing. And as I mentioned earlier about socioeconomic backgrounds and how is that going to affect this difference between the haves and the have-nots? And then just economically, will some of these structures be able to resume? There was a lot of I know youth sports programs that aren't going to be able to keep their doors open, so to say, for very, very long without business. And so there's a lot of really interesting factors to consider when we think about sport and society. And it's been really interesting to see. If anyone, I'm curious too, if anyone in the chat has watched Last Dance, let me know. The Michael Jordan documentary that ESPN moved up to kind of fill the void right now. And I'll never forget. So I use my mom's ESPN DirecTV account, and so I was settling in on Sunday evening. I'd watched the first night. I'm settling in on the next Sunday evening, and go to log in, and it's saying it's saying no access denied. My mom had called and canceled ESPN because there's no sports happening, and I was like, Mom, Michael Jordan documentary, what are you doing? And so that was definitely a hiccup, and I totally I just had to settle with watching it the next day. But I agree with Gerardo, the 90s, and that the music and just the entire cultural aspect, again, thinking about the bigger sports world, it's been really cool to see, and really cool to see that void. I'm a big fan of sports documentaries, and am excited to see all the cool things that come out of that. Oh man. And then, so my wish list. So a lot of my colleagues in sports management are they're calling this the reset in sports. And so for this reset, kind of what I'm hoping for is more opportunities. I'm hoping there's going to be more consideration given to different backgrounds, different, at the youth level, at the grassroots level, and the no more arms race referring to college sports. I've seen it firsthand at Tennessee. If Alabama gets a new training facility, Tennessee has to get a new training facility, and it makes it so all these big schools are just doing ridiculous. They're putting in putt facilities in their stadium, in their college facilities, and the smaller, mid-major schools, there's no way they're ever going to be able to compete. And so I'm hoping that people take a long, hard look at this and think about, okay, what can we do to serve the student athlete first, and not on the kind of maximizing profits of the NCAA or of the media side of sports. And then just more meaningful discourse. And notice my typo there. Definitely was putting this together just a few hours earlier. It's been a crazy week, but the more just more meaningful discussions like this, and having this opportunity to chat with you guys, and just maybe thinking deeper about, I do believe the power of sport for good, but I think we also have to think about kind of the ugly underbelly, and what are the things that we can do to make it better, and give more opportunities, and provide more access, and give more coverage to women. I've been really hoping that ESPN would be playing more women's sports during this time. You can replay old men's sports, but you can also replay old women's sports as well. So tweet at ESPN with that, and maybe we can get some more women's sports on TV. So I have to say ski, which is thank you in my native language. And I definitely want to open it up. We got about 5 minutes. And if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear. Can we unmute anyone, Kaylee? Can they talk if they have an opinion?
Let me check that out for you.
Okay. But I love seeing where everyone was joining us from. It's so crazy because every day it's like a moving target. Like yesterday was the news about bringing students back to campuses, and they expect to have some news about the NBA maybe coming back in July, and it's just an ever evolving thing. And what I have loved is how we've had these opportunities to have webinars and have these kind of learning opportunities to talk more about, okay, what can we do to better provide access to people, to better provide access for underprivileged youth, or for women. Or we had a big Native basketball tournament that was canceled, and it was a big time for Native students to get opportunities to get recruited. And it's like, well, how can we find other ways to get them recruited? And so they're not just depending on this one big event. When do you think when's
Okay, Natalie. So if people have a question and they'd like to verbalize it, go ahead and raise your hand and I can go through and unmute you. Or if you want to send questions to the chat, Natalie can see them there. So
no, I love Kenna's question about the WNBA. I think that they will absolutely be able to continue the momentum. There's been the draft actually went. It was a little bit awkward that how they did where they did it virtually, but it actually did really well. And I think there's a lot more media coverage of the WNBA, which I think it's kind of a chicken or egg situation where it's people say, well, not enough people watch it. And so there's not enough people talking about it. And it's like, well, you have to show it for us to talk about it. And so it's a kind of a constant evolution there. But I think now what's cool is that we are learning, and if any of you are, maybe older than 50 or 60, I know I taught my grandma Disney Plus last week. And that just opened a whole new world to her. And I think that's this whole streaming side is going to be able to open up those opportunities. And especially, I'm glad Scott asked about potential opportunities for Oregon Native communities. I'm really interested in getting some really cool things going with Grand Ronde and the other communities, Warm Springs, because they definitely are really looking for that. And they asked me at Grand Ronde, they're like, can you have students come out and talk to our kids just about being a student athlete? And they just want to hear from anyone they can. And they're actually moving. They usually do a summer program at Grand Ronde, like a kind of an activity summer camp, and they're having to move all that online. And I was just like, absolutely, let me know. We'll set up a Zoom call and we'll talk, have some athletes on, and that might make it even easier because we're not having to worry about the travel out there. And but I would love to see more opportunities made between the Native communities at the youth level. And just like we bring any student on campus early to see themselves on campus, I think we have to really be mindful about doing that for the Native communities. And I think that there's a ton of opportunity for Linfield and for all of Oregon and the Native communities. One really cool organization that I've been able to be a part of is it's called Youth Movement, and we're doing field days at at college campuses. And they started at University of Oregon, where they would bring Native students, Native youth, and we were going to have our first field day at Linfield this year with Native youth from Grand Ronde and the surrounding area. And unfortunately that had to be canceled, but we did come up with a virtual. I'll actually share with you guys really quickly before everyone hops on. I'll share the site with you that we came up with a virtual youth movement. So for those of you on TikTok, you will have to check out the virtual youth movement that we're trying to put together. And we had we had students from University of Oregon, we had students from Stanford, and we had students from Linfield all come up with this really great kind of concept. And so what they're doing is that's not right, ym7.org 2020. So they came up with this really cool concept of creating a TikTok challenge and challenge the youth to create a TikTok with the official sound, and we'll donate $5 until we get to $500. And all this money is going towards COVID-19 response for Native communities. And so this was the Linfield. We did a healthy zucchini muffin from Natalie Amara, one of the great students at Linfield, put together this challenge. And so just things like this, I think we're just constantly evolving of how we can get kids active. And I know if you're a parent, you're probably concerned about screen time. And so making those connections between activity and screen time and finding balance. And I really appreciate all the comments and questions. And I do think the more we're able to have these conversations and talk about maybe the things that need to be fixed, we can really make progress. So I thank you all for joining me tonight, and please reach out. I'll put my email here if anyone wants to email. And I look forward to hopefully seeing most of you back in McMinnville this fall. And I sent that to Jane, and I meant to send it to everyone. And stay healthy and get out and get active. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. Thank you, Natalie, for the amazing presentation. This, I think, was a great first virtual Pubs and Profs. If you haven't been able to make it in person to one of these, I'm so glad you could finally join us. And yeah, have a great rest of your night and a great weekend coming up. And thank you again, Natalie.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you all soon. Stay safe.